Hey all, this is 012 Boku, and I'm coming at you with another review of Fullmetal Alchemist, the original. Yes, we are back again with Fullmetal Alchemist, and in this one, a heartwarming yet probably a sad episode coming up, and I was wondering, or not wondering, but I was realizing that, you know, with this episode, which is called, oh shoot, I didn't even write it down. No, it's House of the Waiting Family, but hold on. What is the episode? Yes, episode 17, House of the Waiting Family. I will have to remember that, because I can't believe I didn't put that down. Because episode 17, House of the Waiting Family, where the Elrics finally arrive in Resombool. They're there with Major Alex Louis Armstrong escorting them. They come home to see the still peaceful town of Resombool, and you have Panako just standing out there at her front porch, smoking. Her and her dog Din see the Elrics coming. Panako tells her granddaughter that Edward and Alphonse have come home. You know, Winry Rockbell is happy about this, and you have, in hilarious fashion, Alphonse and Edward reintroducing themselves to Panako. They also play the game of, you're a short hag, well, you're a puny kid, and all these different things. And then you have Major Armstrong, interfering, saying, that's no way to talk to your elders. And again, it's just a funny thing. Winry throws a wrench at Edward's head, causing a huge lump, and everyone to be surprised by this. Winry is also visibly upset when she discovers that Edward broke his automail in battle, and she's upset with both the brothers who, are fighting, causing destruction, mayhem, all these types of things, because she wants them to be okay, and she wants them to be safe, and she even threatens Alphonse around the way, and she's like, no, I'm not doing anything, Winry. Seriously, ask Edward, he's the one. And, they also, Edward and Alphonse also say they want to get back to Central as quickly as possible. They don't want to be home too long, and, Winry's a little upset by this. Panako's just sort of shrugging it off with indifference, but they don't tell Panako or Winry Rockbell what they're doing necessarily. They just say they need to continue doing research. They don't tell them they're going after Dr. Tim Marco's notes. And as this continues, they say, well, can you fix my arm, my leg, or my arm? And they agree to fix the arm. They also discovered that Edward has grown a little bit more, so they need to adjust his leg. And did you do that too? Oh, I am sorry, really. And as this goes on, they give Edward a different prosthetic leg. Looks like a plastic one, or different type of metal at least. I'm not sure. You have Edward, and Alphonse talking. Alphonse says, Ed, you should go see Mom's grave. You don't know when we're going to be here. And, Ed decides to do that. You have Major Alex Louis Armstrong concerned about Edward and Alphonse. And also, you have where Panako and Winry are getting ready for this procedure. And you have both Panako and Winry sort of ask Major Alex Louis Armstrong, do they get in trouble? Do they, have any problems? Are they getting along well? We don't hear much from them since they went to Central. And, Alex Louis Armstrong just tells them straight up that yes, they've garnered a reputation, and it does lead them to get into trouble. And, I'm sorry if that bothers you, but it is the life that they've done being state alchemists. And, also Armstrong wonders where Edward has gone off to, and, Panako tells him not to worry because he's got a guard. Edward walks with Din through the town. They see a bunch of old townspeople, and you have this farmer and this boy making fun of Edward for his height and being puny. It's a good bit of laugh. You have Edward visiting his mother's grave, just reminiscing about the last time him and his brother were there, saying, we'll bring our mom back. So basically, you can tell Edward's focusing on past mistakes. There also was a part a little earlier where there's a girl walking a cow. Alphonse seems to recognize her, but he can't place it. And then, Winry goes, yeah, you know who that is, Alphonse. That's Nellie. That's our friend Nellie. We used to play hide and seek with her all the time. And, Alphonse is trying to remember, but he can't. He's like saying, yeah, maybe I'm just forgetting. It's been too long from home. And then, Edward comes back, and him and Alphonse are talking in the night, and, Alphonse is telling Edward he has trouble remembering his memories. Is something wrong with me? What's happening? And then Edward sort of falters and says to Alphonse that, Al, there's something I should have told you a long time ago, and I feel bad that I haven't told you. And Alphonse is like, what? What, brother? What do you need to tell me? And, Edward just looks down, he clenches his fist, and he goes, nah, no, don't worry about it, Al, it's not important. And he's like, tell me. And then, Alex Louis Armstrong was listening to their conversation, not intruding, but basically breaks the door of their room and comes in and says, look out at the beautiful night sky. You brothers should not be arguing, that sky is beautiful. And, they're looking out in the night sky, taking it in. Edward's remembering something, long lost from looking at the sky. And, Alphonse is still in contemplation over his memories, it seems, because he just gives a shrugged off, yeah. Then the next day you have Pinocchio and Winry attach the limbs of, Edward Elric, and, he's in pain, he's feeling, bad because the process is very hard. What was it? Alex Louis Armstrong never knew the process was that painful or that hard to begin with, and Pinocchio says yes, even the most hardened men cry out in pain because it's that bad. Then it continues to where Edward's recovering, he's laying on the couch, and then you have Winry. I think it was maybe a little earlier that she noticed it, but Winry brings up the pocket watch of the State Alchemist. She wants to tinker with it, take it apart. She's really happy about it, and you have Edward say, no way, I give this to you, it's gonna end up messed up and you're gonna lose parts, and I'm not giving it to you. He's like, ask somebody else. And then she gives puppy dog eyes with the stars at Alex Louis Armstrong, and Alex Louis Armstrong, who's glowing with stars himself still, is also sweating. He's like, oh, I think I'm going to go chopping yours with a firewood, excuse me. And then she's like, ooh, you men are so stingy. And, so it continues on with Edward now having his new automail arm and leg. They gather all the pieces of Alphonse, put Alphonse back together again. He's basically restructured like he was. I think his structure's a little bit different, but he's built as he was before, and, he's very happy about this. Alphonse is very happy, and they're going to test their skills by sparring. And, of course, Alex Louis Armstrong wants to join them in the spar. They're like, no thank you, no thank you. His shirt's off, he's all twinkling. They're like, no thank you, we're fine. So they spar, and in a good match, and you have Winry, annoyed that they're fighting, and, they just got all fixed, and they're fighting and sparring, boys will be boys sort of thing. And then all of a sudden she's left alone with the pocket watch. She's dreaming about it, and then she takes her, wrenches and screwdrivers, and then she looks back with a slight, Ed, and then she's like, yes, I'm going to take this apart. And while you have the spar going, Alphonse, who has always defeated Edward claims Alphonse has never, he's never won against Alphonse, chucks and throws Edward, very far. Alex Louis Armstrong is like, oh, I'm up next, and then, just tackles Alphonse down, and then all of a sudden, we go back to Winry where she sees in the pocket watch, remember, October 3rd, and, Winry's sort of just gazing at it like, what does this mean? And then you have Alex Louis Armstrong Edward and Alphonse sort of duking it out. And, you have basically Armstrong say, "You're strong, Alphonse, but yet you lack a softness to continue fighting your opponent." And then he tosses him into the ground. And then you have Alphonse and Edward demand to team up against Armstrong. And then what they do is Armstrong and Alphonse are grappling again, tight-fisted like that. All of a sudden, Edward slides underneath Alphonse, basically kicks Armstrong's leg out from under him, and then they slam Armstrong hard into the ground. They're celebrating, yeah, we beat him, awesome match. And then even Alex Louis Armstrong is happy that, these boys have grown and that they have great strength, and he's happy to see it. After the battle, you have Edward taking a shower, cleaning himself off, and you have Winry who, comes up to Edward and says, "Edward, I'm sorry." And he's like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "I'm sorry, I looked at the watch." And then Edward rips it away from her and he says that, I haven't even shown this to Al yet. What are you doing with it? And she's like, "I didn't mean to look, but I saw into it and I looked." And he's like, "Well, now you know what I got to do, what I have to do. And there's no sense of going back." And she's like, "But we're your home. We're your family. You have to return home here. Me and Pinocchio and everyone in the town, we worry about you. Why are you going to do that? Someone has to cry for you. It's always me or it's always Granny. Why are we always crying for you?" And, Edward, who looks like he wants to console Winry, just sort of shrugs it off, doesn't know what to do, and they both continue on with Winry crying about it. As the episode keeps continuing, you have it be like the final night that they're there. Pinocchio cooked this great dinner for Armstrong and the boys, and Winry's worried about them, and Pinocchio goes, "Oh, not to worry, they'll return in their own good time like they always have." And you have Alphonse and Edward with Armstrong looking at their old house that they burnt down to the ground, where Alphonse is recalling the front door, the kitchen, the living room, remembering all the memories. Edward looks like he doesn't even want to be there, doesn't even want to remember what their house looked like. For Alphonse, it's a trip to memory lane. And, he remembers where, Edward would always leave him behind, and, Alphonse would have to go chop firewood, and Edward would always go play. And then he's like, "Yeah, remember when we would run up to the house, Mom would shine a light from the second-story bedroom, so we'd always know when to come home. It was nice." And again, Edward is indifferent. I forget what he says, but he says something, "Yeah, it's like, it's just a long time ago. I care not to remember it." And Armstrong goes, "You boys are fools. You have a family here that loves you. You have people here that love you. You have a home." And then as they're walking back, you have Winry doing the same thing from her second-story home, where she's shining the light like their mother did to it. And Edward smiles at this, remembering the memory Alphonse just dredged up. And then you have Alphonse, like a kid again, running to Winry and Pinocchio's home. And then the next day, they go off. They thank each other for their hospitality. Winry tells the brothers not to get injured again, come back home safe. Edward and Alphonse both promise that they will. And, as it goes on, you have Winry stand there with her Grandma Pinocchio, and she says, "Grandma, I looked at the watch. It said, remember October 3rd, that was the day they burnt down their house and they left. What do you suppose it means?" And the episode ends. And with this one, it's just a great episode filled with camaraderie and just memory lane and just how they have a family, how everyone in the town remembers them, essentially, and how there's so many memories here where Alphonse recalls a lot of these memories of him and his brother, but he struggles to remember everything else, and where Edward, it seems, just wants to forget altogether, which is sort of sad. And for this one, it's really a hard one to pick favorite characters. I give it to everybody in this episode, even the farm boy and farm man who were voiced by Mike McFarlane and our Bruce Elliott, Reikio Kuchiki, and Yoshinori Sonobe. But I also have to say that everybody did a great round. So to say everybody else too, I'll just say it as well. Edward, Vic Mignogna, Romy Paku, Alphonse, Aaron Desmook, Rie Kugamiya, Armstrong, Christopher Sabat, Kenji Utsumi, Winry, Caitlin Glass, Megumi Toyoguchi, Panako, Julie Erickson, Miyoko Aso, and that's pretty much the whole cast for this episode. If there's people I have to give it to, if there's two I have to give out the bat, because again, Aaron Desmook and Vic Mignogna gave a great performance in this episode. So did Julie Erickson, who played Panako, and their Japanese counterparts, of course. But I have to give it up to Winry, Caitlin Glass, Megumi Toyoguchi, and Armstrong, Christopher Sabat, and Kenji Utsumi. Because the way they did their characters was Winry was definitely like a surrogate sister to them, a friend, a family member, really caring about them, being rough and tumble with them, but at the same time, sad that they're not there, they're not together. You can tell, even in this one, Winry likes Edward and probably maybe even Alphonse. She likes them both, but she definitely has a connection to Edward a bit more, and you can tell she really cares. She can't always put it into words, but she always shows her emotion, and Caitlin Glass does that really well. So does Megumi Toyoguchi. And for Kenji Utsumi and Christopher Sabat, who played Armstrong, you know, he really was a point to where he wants his brothers to succeed. He's giving them good advice, saying you have a family here, you have a place to go back to, this town is nice, you see things that aren't in the city. So he was such a character to wrap the brothers in, bring them around when they needed humanity. And also, as my friend Jarek says, he's a surrogate father to them as well. So both Kenji Utsumi and Christopher Sabat gave great performances with that. And overall, it's just a great episode as they keep going forward and trying to get to Central to learn Tim Marco's notes. And as we now see, things are slowly unraveling for all the characters of the show. But again, what do you guys think? Did you like episode 17, House of the Waiting Family, of this episode of Fullmetal Alchemist? You know, have you guys even seen the original Fullmetal Alchemist at all? Leave a comment down below and we'll get this discussion going. Until then, this is Owen Tuboku, and I'll talk to you guys again later, alright?